This story is generated and narrated by AI. If you notice any glitches in the voice, feel free to leave a comment. Your feedback helps improve future videos. Tonight's tale is titled Forbidden Knowledge. Have you ever come across something, a book, a place, a name, that you felt instinctively should be left alone? In this story, we follow a lone American researcher in Prague and the manuscript that changed everything. I arrived in Prague at the end of October, just as the air turned sharp enough to draw blood from the lungs. The university had granted me a 6-month research fellowship to investigate religious symbology in 13th century manuscripts, specifically marginalia that didn't conform to the Latin Church's canon. That was the official reason. The real one? I was running from a thesis I couldn't finish, from a breakup I couldn't process, from a country I no longer felt was mine. Prague felt right. Its streets curled like sleeping serpents. The rooftops sagged under centuries of snow and revolution. Even the graffiti here seemed older than America. The archives were housed beneath Charles University's oldest wing, a Romanesque cellar converted into a research library. Vaulted stone ceilings, narrow slits for windows, just thick enough to mute your own breathing. It was beautiful and dead quiet. A week into my work, I came across something unusual. It was just a footnote. A passing mention in a damaged Czech manuscript cataloging prohibited texts from the 15th century. No full entry. Just this line: Codex Lyrium, removed from circulation, unshelved, consulted only under archivist consent. Not to be copied. I didn't think much of it at first. Europe is full of forbidden books, grimoires, hoaxes, Dark Age madness. But this one kept crawling back into my mind. Why wasn't it listed in the digital archive? Why did the librarian's smile vanish when I asked about it? The archivist was an older man named Wojtek. He spoke English sparingly, with a strange cadence, like every word was a memory he wasn't sure he wanted back. When I asked about the Codex Lyrium, his eyes narrowed. No circulation is not for study, he said, wiping his spectacles with the same cloth he used for dusting manuscripts. I pressed him. I used the official fellowship credentials, even offered a signed letter from my advisor. He said nothing. But later that afternoon, I found a brass key in my assigned desk drawer. No note, just the key. That night, I had the first dream. I was standing in the archive's lower chamber, but everything was wrong. The light was red, not firelight or LEDs, but a deep internal glow, like the room itself was bleeding. The shelves weren't lined with books, but with dozens of open mouths, muttering syllables I didn't recognize. In the dream, I couldn't move. But something was turning pages behind me. The next morning, I opened the door that the key fit. It was a narrow hall hidden behind the stone wall beside the archivist station. I wouldn't have noticed the seam in the stone if I hadn't been searching. It opened into a chamber with no label, no index, no seating, just a single iron lectern bolted to the ground, and on it, the Codex Lyrium. The manuscript was bound in reddish-gray leather, dry to the touch, like tree bark in winter. There was no title on the spine. No dates. It looked older than anything I'd seen in my academic life. Its pages were covered in densely packed symbols, not Latin, not Greek, not Hebrew or Coptic. But something familiar lingered in their structure, almost as if they wanted to be read, or worse, recognized. I copied the first page by hand, not for study, not for translation, just compulsion. Some of the characters shifted slightly as I copied them. At first, I assumed it was fatigue or shadows playing tricks. But when I looked back down, the page had changed. There were more symbols than before. One was shaped like a twisted eye, and it was exactly where I had drawn a circle. The next few days passed strangely. People spoke to me in the archive, but I couldn't recall their names. Emails from my professor arrived unread. The archivist stopped making eye contact. Lena, a fellow researcher, or maybe a visiting academic, began sitting across from me during work hours. Though I don't remember how we were introduced, she spoke very little. She just watched my hand as I copied page after page, and sometimes she smiled, not at me, but at the book. On the fourth day, I made a mistake. I tried to photograph the manuscript with my phone. The screen flashed white, then black. When I looked again, the phone was still in my hand, but the camera roll showed 37 photos of my own sleeping face, each one taken from above my bed. I stopped sleeping after that. When I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers from the dream again, except now they spoke with voices I recognized. My professor, my ex, my mother, all of them muttering the same phrase over and over: write it down before it remembers you. The final event that week happened on a Sunday. The library was closed. I returned anyway. I told myself it was just to check the door, to make sure I hadn't imagined the key, but when I opened the archive, the lights were already on. I heard footsteps down in the hidden chamber. I descended the steps slowly. The air was thick, not damp, not dusty, but charged, like something had exhaled the moment before I arrived. And when I reached the bottom, I saw myself standing at the lectern, flipping pages, same coat, same ink on my fingertips, same black ring under my eye from 3 nights without sleep. Then the figure turned its head, and it wasn't me. The skin was too smooth. The eyes had no sclera, only endless script, coiling like smoke in twin spirals. It opened its mouth, and in my voice, it said, "You copied it wrong. Now it knows your name." I woke up in my dorm bed, still in my coat, my boots soaked. The notebook was open beside me. My handwriting was there, but not my words. Each line filled with characters I had no memory of writing. Some of them were starting to glow. I should have left Prague that morning, packed my books, deleted the notes, burned the journal, but I didn't. Instead, I returned to the archive, not out of curiosity anymore. Something had shifted. I was no longer reading the book, it was reading me. The codex wasn't where I'd left it. It had moved, or perhaps I had. The lectern was still there, but the space around it had deepened. Stone walls now extended further than I remembered. Shelves I'd never seen before curved out into impossible angles. I tried to step forward, but the ground wasn't stone anymore. It was parchment. Layered sheets of skin-colored paper stretched taut beneath my feet, each one inscribed with the same character over and over, the eye-shaped symbol I had, drawn wrong on the first page. I turned back, but the door was gone. I wasn't alone in that space. Figures moved just beyond my vision, flickers of limbs in peripheral corners. In the air, it hummed, not with electricity, but with intent, like 1,000 unseen throats were whispering not to me, but through me. Somehow, I made it back. I don't know how long I was gone. A day. A week. Lena was waiting in the reading room. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just said, "You shouldn't have written your name inside the margins." I froze. She was right. I had written my name. Not once, but dozens of times, absent-mindedly, like a signature to keep myself grounded. Somehow, I thought it would protect me. She continued, "There are alphabets that don't just record language. They remember it. This one doesn't want to be read. It wants to be spoken." I asked her how she knew. She didn't answer, just took my notebook, flipped to the latest page, and pointed to a line I didn't remember writing. "Speak it aloud, or carry it forever." I told her I couldn't read it aloud. I didn't even understand what it said, but she looked at me and whispered, "You don't need to understand it. You just need to say it in the order it's written." That night, I tried. I sat in my room, door locked, all lights off. The city outside felt distant, like it belonged to a world I'd stepped out of and couldn't re-enter. I opened the journal. I began to pronounce the symbols, slowly, carefully. Shaping them with my tongue, they felt wrong in my mouth, like chewing glass. By the fourth line, my nose was bleeding. By the seventh, I heard knocking not on my door, but inside the walls, like something crawling through the pipes. Trying to listen. I stopped, but the words didn't. They kept sounding in my ears, not as echoes, but as pre-echoes, as if I was hearing what I was about to say. I covered my mouth, but I could still hear myself, repeating the same passage, over and over, until finally, the last line came out on its own, from a throat that wasn't mine. The walls cracked, just slightly, not structurally, but linguistically. Hairline fractures spread through the pane in the shape of the glyphs. The script had left the page. It was now part of my room. When I returned to the archive the next morning, I found the archivist waiting. His hands were wrapped in cloth. Burned, it seemed, though he said nothing. He didn't look surprised to see me. Instead, he whispered, "If you're still hearing the book when it's closed, it means it heard you too." Then he handed me something. Not the codex, but a mirror, old, tarnished, the kind you'd expect to see in a cathedral confessional. "Place it where you sleep," he said, "not to see what's behind you, but to let it see itself." That night, I did what he said. I placed the mirror on my desk, facing the bed. Around midnight, I awoke, not to sound, but to absence. The room had no sound, no breath, no hum from the radiator, just stillness. Then the mirror began to fog, but not from me. A shape emerged in the glass. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't me. It was pages, turning rapidly, as if the codex had somehow entered the mirror, and standing behind it was Lena, or something wearing her face. Her eyes were blank. Her mouth was sewn shut with ink thread, and in her hand, she held my notebook, bleeding from its spine. Then she mouthed something I couldn't hear, not at first, but slowly. The sound filtered in, not through my ears, but through the language center of my brain, as if the mirror was translating her silence. She said, "You brought it into a world that cannot hold it. Now it will carve a space that can." When I woke up, the mirror was shattered, but only from inside. No shards on the floor, no cracks on the glass facing out. The silver backing had corroded in the shape of the eye symbol, and in my notebook, the next page had already been written. In my handwriting, but I never picked up the pen. I stopped writing, or at least I thought I did, but pages continued to fill. Every morning, I would wake to find new entries in my notebook, written in my style, in my words, but they recounted events that hadn't happened yet, or hadn't happened to me. One entry described walking into the old town square at exactly 4:06 a.m., hearing bells, seeing a woman with no shadow whisper into my ear. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I went outside just to walk, clear my head. By instinct, not intention, I found myself in the square. There were no people, no tourists, just fog, and at 4:06, the astronomical clock rang once, and a woman stepped past me. I couldn't see her face, but she leaned toward me and whispered a word in a language I've never heard, yet somehow understood. The word was Abais, and the moment she said it, I knew it wasn't just a sound, it was a location. I rushed back to my room, opened the journal, and found a new phrase beneath that same entry. The name is the place, say it, and it begins to shape you. I began noticing changes, small at first. My reflection would delay slightly in the mirror. My voice echoed twice, once in the room, once from the journal, and I began dreaming in languages I'd never studied. Lena stopped coming to the archive. I asked the archivist if he'd seen her. He only replied she got too close to the margins. When I asked what that meant, he said, "You think you're studying the manuscript, but it's the margins that study you, the footnotes. The empty spaces, they're where the codex leaves room for more." That night, I found something in my journal that wasn't mine. The ink was darker, older. It bled through the paper like something written in oil and rot. It read, "Do not write beyond what is written, or you become the context." The words began showing up outside the notebook, etched into windows, scratched into wood panels in the library, tattooed in dust across my walls, and worse, my thoughts were being overwritten. I'd reach for a memory and find a paragraph instead. One morning, I found the archivist gone, his desk empty, his gloves left behind, but on the chair sat a new volume, bound in pale leather, no title, no markings. I opened it. The first page had my name. The second, a recounting of the first time I ever saw the codex. Then the third, yesterday's entry. Then the fourth, something I hadn't yet done. The entry read, "He returns to the cellar one last time, not to study, but to ask. And when the book opens, it does not speak, it devours." I closed the book, but the cellar door creaked open anyway. I don't remember walking down the stairs, only that I was suddenly there. The codex was waiting on the lectern, but this time, it wasn't open, it was facing away from me, as if it had turned on its own. I whispered, "What are you?" The pages flipped, not from wind, but from choice, and the words on the spread didn't form sentences, they formed instructions to build something. I followed them, not by will, but by language. I collected ink, ash, bone fragments, wax. Each ingredient came easily, like I already knew where they were, and on the cellar floor, I inscribed a circle with the eye symbol at its center. When I finished, the codex turned another page. This time, it showed an image of me, kneeling in the circle, eyes black, mouth open, and behind me, a second figure. Lena, not alive, not dead, transcribed. Her skin was no longer skin. It was parchment, covered in script, moving script, as if she had become a page, still being written. Then I felt something press against my back, a breath, but not warm, cold, ancient, a wind that had passed through too many mouths, and a voice said, "Now you understand. To study a sacred text is to risk becoming its final chapter." I turned, but there was no one there, only the codex and its final page, blank. I picked up the quill, and without knowing why, I began to write. I don't know how long I've been down here. Time doesn't pass in the same way anymore, not when the air smells like old parchment and your veins pulse with ink. I tried to leave the cellar, but the stairs just led back down again. The walls, lined with books that weren't there before, books that whispered, scratched, shifted. Some had no titles. Others bore names I recognized, including my own. I opened one. Inside, I saw scenes from my life, but not as memories. They were chapters, titled and annotated. Someone had written commentary on my choices, my thoughts, even things I hadn't yet done. One note read, "Notice how he hesitates here. This marks the beginning of his transformation. The ink has entered the blood. The margins now consume the mind." I touched the page and felt it pulse, a slow, steady rhythm, like a second heartbeat. I stumbled to the mirror across the room, but the reflection was no longer mine. My eyes had turned black, not void black, but filled with moving script. My veins darkened beneath my skin, trailing down my arms like cursive infection. My fingertips had become dry, brittle. When I touched the wall, letters flaked off. I was shedding language. I screamed, but the sound came out as a phrase, a sentence not in English, not in Latin, but in the language of the Codex. And when the words left my mouth, they didn't vanish. They hovered in the air like smoke, then absorbed into the walls. I wasn't speaking anymore. I was writing aloud. Then the final page called to me, still blank, still waiting, and the voice returned, calm, patient, old as the first written word. The author was always fictional. The manuscript writes itself, but it needs skin to bind, ink to flow, thought to feed. My hand lifted. I didn't command it. The quill was weightless and wet before I dipped it. I looked down. There was no ink pot, only the wound on my wrist. I began to write, not because I wanted to, because I had to, because the book was never just paper and pigment. It was hunger. Each line I wrote, another memory faded. My childhood bedroom, my father's voice, Lena's smile, gone, replaced by narrative. I tried to stop. I screamed again, but my tongue had turned stiff, too dry to form words. When I pulled it from my mouth with trembling fingers, I saw that it had writing on it, a phrase, repeating over and over. I consent. I consent. I consent. I looked at my skin. It had become pale, fibrous. My chest bore titles. My arms, marginalia. Every breath exhaled footnotes. The codex closed, satisfied, and I collapsed, but I didn't fall. I folded. My limbs bent like pages. My spine stiffened like a binding rod, and the air grew colder, not empty, but archival. That's when I heard the archivist's voice, faint but clear. You wanted to know everything, but some truths are not learned. They are worn, absorbed. And you, dear reader, were always meant to be a book, not a man. I rest now, on a shelf I cannot see, in a room without time or exits. Once in a while, I hear footsteps, visitors, new researchers. One of them will find me someday, will open the cover, read the first sentence, and begin to forget their own name. Because knowledge is never free, and this is how the Codex grows. If you enjoyed this story of forbidden knowledge, arcane texts, and supernatural horror, consider subscribing to Whispers in the Shadows. What would you do if a book started to change you? Leave your thoughts below, and beware of what you choose to read.